Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a very exciting video because I'm introducing my 2021 Pan Those Eyeshadows and I'm also going to introduce another project on my channel, but I'll talk about that at the end of this video. But before we jump into any of the details, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. But let's just start talking about my goals and the project for 2021. So overall, the project looks quite similar to what I did last year. I do have a few changes and a few new rules that I'm going to introduce to my project in 2021. I feel like overall the whole concept of the project is going to be, like I said, very similar. So I will go through all of the rules in a second. But if you haven't seen any of the Pan Those Eyeshadows videos before, I'm sure you have, but I just want to go through the rules overall. Basically what the aim of the project is to hit pan on eyeshadows, and you do select your eyeshadows randomly. It is a little bit different for each person. I know some people randomize the palette, then pick a shade, or randomize the palette, then randomize a shade, or what I do, have a spreadsheet with all of their eyeshadows and randomize an eyeshadow that way. So you can do it a little bit how you want to. So it's a very customizable project and you can basically set it up the way you want to do it. Previous rounds I've been working on 5 eyeshadows at a time, and I'm going to do that this year as well, but I'm going to set it up a little bit differently, like I said, which I will talk about in a second. And I think most people are either working on 5 or 6 eyeshadows, so that's basically the main concept of the project. The aim, like I said, is to hit pan on it. So usually what you do is you keep the eyeshadow in until you hit pan on it, or you can have a certain amount of usage that is going to be a maximum. So let's say you really don't like the shade, you can use it for example 20 or 25 times and then roll it out instead. I haven't had that before, and I'm not going to introduce it this time either, because my goal with this project is to hit pan on eyeshadows, and even though it is eyeshadows that I might not like, I used to kind of find it part of the challenge to pan on it. So I'm not going to have a usage goal this year either, or like a usage kind of limit, but I know some people do that as well. And of course I can't mention this video without mentioning the creator of the video, which is Alexandra. She is a fellow YouTuber here, and I'm really excited because she has actually decided to do this project again this year. I believe she did it back in 2017 and 18, but then took a 2-year break not doing it, and she is actually introducing it again this year, which I'm really excited about. So I will leave her channel down below so you can go check her out, and I will also leave a list of some of other YouTubers here that are also doing this project this year. So let's just jump into my rules that I have set for myself this year. Like I said, I'm gonna work on 5 eyeshadows again, which I did last year and I also did in 2019, so that's gonna be the same. But this year I have decided to have one focus shadow in my quintet that I'm gonna pick from 2 palettes. And if you do see my Pan palette introduction for 2021, or the video where I asked you to help me decide what to pan in 2021, you might already know what I'm gonna roll in, but I decided to put my 2 naked palettes as my focus palettes this year. So what that means is that one of my shades will always come from these 2 palettes. So when I do roll a shade in from here, I'm going to work on that until I hit pan on it, and when I hit pan on that shade, I'm going to select a new shadow from these 2 palettes. All of the other shades that are remaining 4 can be from any palette in my collection. And if I do roll in for some chance, roll in another shade from these palettes with those kind of random shades, I will keep that in as well, but I won't continue rolling that shade from these 2 palettes, if that makes sense. So I will roll the kind of shades from these palettes in a second, but I just want to show you right now. So this is my Naked 1 palette. I already have 3 pans in here. Any shade in this palette is eligible to be rolled in, and same with this one. This is my Naked 3 and I have 2 pans in this palette. So when it comes to other rules that I've set myself this year that is slightly different than I've done before, is that this year I'm going to give myself 5 vetoes. That there can be any shade kind of that I don't want to work on, and that could be a shade that I've been working on for a month and I don't really like, or it could be a shade that is too similar to something else I'm already panning, or something like that. So I will have 5 vetoes in the year, so I can roll out any 5 shades or re-roll for any 5 shades that I want. Then the last kind of rule that I have changed this year compared to my previous years is that I have a few eyeshadows in my collection that I will actually have only a usage goal on, and I don't want to pan on it. I did mention before that I'm not going to do that because overall I'm not, but for my Cleona shades, which are my multi-chrome eyeshadows, I have decided to put a goal of usage on those rather than hitting pan, because they are really expensive eyeshadows and I really treasure them in my collection, and I sometimes can find myself kind of using the same shade over and over again just for the sake of hitting pan. Of course, I never really waste my eyeshadows, I don't really dig into them or anything like that, but I kind of use them on an everyday basis, if that makes sense. And with my Clear shades, like I said, I do really treasure them, and I don't really have any dupes for any of those in my collection, so I don't want to kind of go through them that quickly. So with those eyeshadows, I have set a goal for 15 uses, but with everything else in my collection, I will have the goal to hit pan. So those are basically the only rules that I set for myself this year. Everything else I'm going to follow basically the general rules for this project. But moving on from that, I'm gonna jump into talking about my stats, so how many eyeshadows I have, my current pan percentage, goals, things like that, and then finally we're gonna roll in all of the shades for the next round, which I'm so excited about. So let me just pull up my laptop and get my spreadsheet out. So looking at my stats currently, at the beginning of 2021, I have 553 eyeshadows in my collection, and that is split between 37 palettes plus all my singles. That is slightly higher than what I ended on in 2020, and that is because I received a few palettes for Christmas, and I always add them in starting the new year because I don't really have time to play around with them between Christmas and New Year's, so I always add that in starting the next year. So with that, and also a declutter that I decided to do at the end of the year, I currently have 72 pans in my collection, meaning a pan percentage of 13.02. So again, that has gone down quite significantly from my pan percentage in end of 2020, and that is because I decluttered quite a few pans. I have also chosen to take out my Pana palette for 2020 because I'm going to do the finale of that at the end of January. I just want to take all of that out to kind of start fresh. So that is my starting points for this project. And when it comes to goals for this project this year, I don't really want to set a pan percentage goal, and that is because I have a different goal in mind this year, and that is the second part of the title of this video, which is my project 100 pans. I have decided to really challenge myself this year, and I do want to hit 100 pans in my eyeshadow collection this year. Last year I hit 53 eyeshadow pans, so I will have to step up my game quite a bit, but I'm still hopeful that I will be able to hit that goal, or at least being close to it. So that is basically going to be my goal, and obviously that's not just going to be from this project. That's going to be like an overall goal, and I'm going to kind of focus on that rather than hitting a certain percentage. I would say that kind of like my overall goal, if I would have to talk percentage, would probably be to try to hit 25% eyeshadow pans, but it all depends on how much eyeshadow I bring into my collection. But honestly, anything over 20% I would be really happy with. So I would say kind of somewhere between 20-25% would be absolutely amazing. So that's basically all of the stats. Just talking a bit more about the project 100 pans. That's going to run from the 1st of Jan to the 31st of December. So that basically means that I have a full year to hit 100 pans, and that's going to be throughout several projects. The main ones is probably going to be this one, as well as my A to C project pan, which I introduced on the 1st of January. So if you haven't checked that out, please do, because in that project I basically took the A to C project pan and kind of altered it to be an eyeshadow panning project, and I took every single letter and I matched that to an eyeshadow palette or an eyeshadow pan in my collection, and I wanted to pan on those eyeshadows. So that should be 26 pans hopefully by the end of the year, plus what I get in this project, as well as some other projects here and there. So that's kind of my setup on how I'm going to reach those 100 pans. But with all that said, we're going to move on to my favorite part of each video, which is rolling my eyeshadow shapes. So I'm going to start by randomizing the eyeshadow from my focus palette. So I put in 1 to 24 in my randomizer because each palette has 12 shades. If I were to randomize the shade that I already have pan, I'm just going to re-roll. But let's go ahead and pick the eyeshadows. And also 1 to 12 will come from my naked 1, and 13 through 24 will come from my naked 3. So the first eyeshadow that we'll be working on from my focus palette is going to be number 17. So 17 comes from my naked 3 palette, and this is going to be the, let's see which palette it's going to be, or which shade, sorry. So it's 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So 17 is the shade Buzz, which is just this kind of pink toned shimmer right here. It's actually quite a nice shade. So there you have Buzz. It's just like a really nice mauvey kind of shimmery shade. It's actually one of the more flakier shades in that palette, so I'm really excited to play around with this more. So that's going to be the first shade I'm going to work on, which comes from my focus palettes. So for the remaining shades, I have put in between 1 and 553. If you do roll something with pan, I'm just going to go ahead and re-roll because I haven't taken any of those pans or those eyeshadows out. So I already have 17 from the last rotation, but I have changed the numbers. So the first number for my actual list will be number 82. So number 82 comes from one of my newer palettes, and this is one of the eyeshadows from the Jackie Aina and Anastasia palette, and it is in the shade Edges. The third shade I will be working on is going to be number 49, and that should be another Anastasia palette actually, so let's see what shade that is. That comes from my Anastasia Sultry palette, and this shade is in the shade Birch. The fourth shade I'm going to work on is going to be number 275, so hopefully something different than Anastasia this time, but I think that's going to be Colourpop. Let's see. 275. I was actually incorrect, so 275 comes from one of my Juvia's Place palettes, and this is from the Masquerade mini palette in the shade Dahlia. Then the very final shade I'm going to work on is going to be number 358. So number 358 comes from my Francation palette by Those Colors, and the shade I'm going to work on is called Girl Bye. So I'm going to go ahead and pick those palettes out, and I will show you what my color story will be. So I'm back and I have my 4 eyeshadow palettes here. The first eyeshadow that I did roll in came from my Jackie Aina palette, and the shade that I am going to work on is the shade Edges, which is this shade right here. This palette is completely untouched by me. I have swatched a few of the shades but actually never worn them, so it's going to be quite interesting working on this eyeshadow. So there you have the swatch of Edges. It's just a really kind of slightly deeper orangey brown. Also, fun fact, this palette is most likely going to be my 1 week 1 palette for January, because that's currently what's ahead in the voting. So you're probably going to see a lot of looks with this palette and that shade coming up. So that's quite exciting. I also have the shade Ginger and Sponsored, so these two here in my A to C project pan. So I'm going to reach for this palette a lot coming up, but I'm really excited to work on another shade in this palette. The next palette that I rolled in was my Sultry palette, again from Anastasia. The shade that I rolled in is the shade Birch, which is the matte shade up in the corner. So we have another matte to work on, but this one is definitely lighter than the one I rolled in from the Jackie Aina palette. And there you have the shade Birch. It's just going to be a really nice transition shade. It's slightly on the warmer side, but it's more of a neutral brown compared to Edges, and I think these two will pair really nice, and I think this brown would also pair really nice with the shade from the Naked Free palette. Next up we have my Masquerade mini palette from Juvia's Place. This palette looks like this. I have had one shade in here before, which was this shade up here called Dahlia, and I'm actually going to have the shade in here that's very similar in name, which is Dahlia, and that is this neutral shade down here, which I think is going to be a perfect shade to work on in combination to what I already have rolled in. And there you have Dahlia. It's absolutely stunning. It's like a shimmery kind of light gold. I think this again going to work really well with these right there, and I think for now I have a really good color story going, so let's see how the last shade will go with these as well. So my last shade comes from my Francation palette with Those Colors in collaboration with Jessie and Katie, and the shade that I rolled in is the shade Girl Bye, which is the middle shade on the bottom row, which is this kind of deeper mauve brown right here. So you can see at the bottom there, that is where I have the shade Girl Bye from the Francation palette, and that is my color story for the month of January. I think this is a really interesting color story. I think these all go very well together. I feel like I have maybe like 2 or 3 combinations here that would be super good. I feel like these 3 middle shades would go perfectly together. I think this one and this transition shade and this top shade would go really well together, and I think I can do a few more things mixing and matching. So I'm really happy with this, and it's quite interesting because in my last rounds of 2020, if you did follow that project as well, you know that I had a lot of color in this project, so it's going to be quite refreshing to have a more neutral color story to work on. and I think it's going to be quite an easy way to kind of start this project off, and also kind of incorporate some of my more colorful shades from other projects. So I'm quite excited to have this color story going. So I have these 5 palettes right here, and honestly I feel like some of these shades are going to be a bit harder to hit pan on. The Francation palette, I haven't worked on many of these mattes. I had pan on one of the shimmers, but I feel like the mattes are going to take quite a while because they are a bit kind of firmer pressed. So I'm not sure how long this deeper shade would take to hit pan on, but that is a shade I think will stay in for at least 2 months. The Birch shade from the Sultry palette is potentially something that I could hit pan on in a month. The mattes are harder to pan on in the Anastasia formula than the shimmers, but the pans are usually not too deep, so I'm going to really try to focus on this shade, but it might still take 2 months. Definitely same with the Jacquard palette. It's another matte. I think this one is going to stay in for a long time as well, or at least like 2-3 months. With the Naked Free palette, I think this shade, it is a shimmer and it is quite a flaky shade, so I think I'm going to focus in on this shade as well, because although the pans in the Urban Decay palettes are a bit deeper, I think the formula of this shade is going to make it a little bit easier to pan on, so I am probably going to focus in on this shade in the next month. And then finally we have my Masquerade palette from Juvia's Place, and this is definitely a shade that I'm going to try to pan on in the first month, because I tend to have an easy time hitting pan on the Juvia's Place formula because the pans are quite shallow, and this is a shade that I can incorporate in a lot of my neutral looks. But that was all for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And also make sure to leave some tips and tricks down below for me for my project 100 pans, because I know that's going to be quite a tricky thing to hit this year. And also just let me know what you think of it, and if you think I'm going to make that or if it's going to be too much of a stretch. But other than that, I really hope you're having an amazing day, and I will talk to you in my next video. Bye guys!